welcome to the summer webinar series. So this is actually a kickoff off of a workshop on practical AI that we've been running here at Digital Skillet. So essentially what we've been doing here at Digital Skillet is getting groups of 20, 30 folks together in a room to actually work through practical real life examples in how you use things like ChatGPT, Copilot, and so on and so forth to work on real problems in, engineering, surveying, accounting, any sort of technical discipline, and actually work through on laptops how these things, how we can extract value out of generative AI. We've broken that down into a webinar series, and today we're doing our introductory one, which is really the goal for you folks is to get a high-level exposure to the actual capabilities and limitations of generative AI. And we're going to be going through some practical case studies in terms of how that actually works. We're also going to be one of the big things that comes out of these workshops is this concept of how do we use ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini or DeepSeek as a strategic assistant as opposed to simply a dumb source of answers. And we're going to be looking into that because that really leads into this whole question of how do we trust the outputs out of these things and how do we actually effectively QA QC these results so that we're getting something good out of it. For me, the goal of this webinar today is first and foremost is to figure out directions of interest, understand what you are interested in seeing as the summer goes on in terms of more webinars where we explore various topics in generative AI. Are people interested in more QA QC stuff? Do people want to know about image generation? Are people curious about what the differences between different models are? All of those types of things. I'm going to ask you to provide feedback after this in terms of where you'd like to see the webinar series going. It's really organic. And then as well, as you'll see, we do practical case studies in this webinar, and the source of those case studies are attendees. People come up and say, hey, you know what, Rob, we're really interested in understanding how we can automate power line profile generation, or it'd be really handy to be able to create a chatbot that looks at current policies with regards to surveying or engineering or anything like that. How do we actually do that and cross-check it? And so come to me, drop me a note, hook up on LinkedIn, and let me know what case studies you'd be interested in pursuing. One of the things that we do highlight before we get too far along on this thing is that everyone's really excited about generative AI and getting into things, but there are IT policies for a reason. So one of the things that we learn as we start to use these tools is we're living an age of, I think iTunes really ruined it for everybody in terms of just hitting I accept without reading the T's and C's. You gotta look at your corporate policies affecting your digital work, right? And that includes IT, data governance, privacy, all of those types of things. And of course, what we're doing here is an educational webinar. I guarantee you next week, ChatGPT will have different features. Gemini will have launched features to catch up. Everything's constantly changing. We're going to see often that a core concept in here is that generative AIs are not infallible. They make mistakes. So this is educational. If you're using it in practice, figure out how you're checking and double checking your work, because at the end of the day, we have to make sure that our outputs are correct. And also, we're going to be using a number of different tools today. I often refer to ChatGPT just because that's kind of the oldest one that I've been using. But as well, you'll be seeing examples from Gemini, from Mistral, from DeepSeek. We have no dog in the race as to which one you should be using. Frankly, they're all kind of the same. The old saw, it's really a Ford versus Chevy debate. Ford's obviously the best, but Chevy will get you there as well. So we don't really take a position here. Instead, we try to use whatever is accessible and whatever we can do. We're going to assume today that the majority of you folks have used generative AI in some capacity. So whether that's been using ChatGPT to write a memo or revise some text, generally this has been around for a while now. Although in our workshops, we do find that typically, 10 to 15% of the attendees have never actually used this. So we'll go over a quick interface overview so that you folks are familiar, right? This is your general web page that you'd be logging into, in this case for ChatGPT. You basically put in your prompt at the bottom of the screen here. You type what your question is, what you would like this thing to do. You end up getting answers in this sort of chat thread format above where you put in your prompts. And then what becomes really handy is your conversations are actually archived and put somewhere, usually to the left-hand panel, where you can go back and continue your old chats. So as I'm working through a problem, I can actually continue my old chats and see what was done before. And there's this concept of memory that we discuss, where as you keep talking to the generative AI in a chat thread, it remembers its previous responses and evolves accordingly. And of course, there's limitations with regards to how far back it can remember and things like that. One of the handy things is that we work on in a different webinar is looking at customizing GPTs. So you can actually, once you've defined a really cool prompt that you like or a workflow that you think will work for your colleagues and so on and so forth, most in Gemini, they're gems. In ChatGPT, they're customized GPTs. You can actually package that up into a not a custom, deep learning, you've trained it on your data, a quote unquote real large language model, but rather a tweaked version of ChatGPT that works better for your particular purposes. And those again are accessible on the screen as well. There's a number of different models. OpenAI, Gemini, Cloud are constantly issuing new improved language models, it seems monthly. And you can actually pick, there's certain strengths and weaknesses to various models. You can usually select what model you're using so that your answers come out in a way that you're actually desiring. There's also a number of tools. ChatGPT, Gemini are not simply chatbots. You don't just simply talk to them. Instead, you can upload attachments, you can force web searches, you can do things like record audio files, all different types of things, usually located in the bottom bar. And the one kind of really interesting thing about all of these language models and generative AIs is how very similar they all look. At the end of the day, once you've started using ChatGPT, using Gemini is quite simple. DeepSeek has effectively the same interface as Copilot, and so on and so forth. So these things really do all quite look the same once you've started to go into them. Now, one of the real important messages that we try to convey in these workshops is that a lot of people have been using generative AI for the purposes of, doing things like search. So we're seeing a lot of concern, I would say, on Google's behalf in terms of will AI replace search? Why would I go to Google to ask for a listing of things I should be concerned about when replacing my garage roof, when instead I could go to Claude and say, hey, Claude, you're generative AI. Tell me what I should be concerned about when replacing this roof. So search is definitely one of the most common uses that we're seeing. Similarly, writing memos, generating outlines, rewriting text. I really always feel bad for Clippy, first off, because they've been offering to write a letter since I think 1995, and they never got any traction. But now we're happily dropping letters into ChatGPT to get them rewritten. And you do have to ask what Grammarly was kind of doing wrong the whole time as well. However, those are superficial uses of Gen AI. What I really think is interesting is for years and years and years, you've probably heard in the news about advances in machine learning, right? The ability to recognize objects and images, the ability, terrifyingly, to do deep fakes, to generate voice, to generate video, even the ability to navigate through websites and actually do this, what we call agentic AI, where it can start making decisions for you and really leveraging that powerful machine learning aspect. ChatGPT and its ilk provide the every person with an easy way to go and access those technologies without needing a degree from MIT. And kind of in the middle of that water column, we can progressively get more and more sophisticated in our use of generative AI by looking at things like document interpretation, image generation, data analytics. It was mentioned, coding. So those kind of things is definitely where we start to get higher on the value chain. And ultimately, what kind of attracts people to generative AI is these sorts of deep integrations. So in this case, let's assume I'm going to be doing a presentation on critical thinking. I've written a little bit of an outline as to what I want to talk about, 6 main points here. Perhaps I use ChatGPT to write that, but now I've got to do a presentation. And presentations are painful to make. So with Copilot, because Copilot's integrated into the Microsoft suite, I can do things like say, hey, PowerPoint, I've got to write a 30-minute presentation on critical thinking. I want some nice backgrounds. I want some graphics. I want speaker notes. And here's what you want to talk about. And it'll go through and create an outline that will fit about 30 minutes and then actually generate automatically all the slides are required. Now, are these the greatest slides in the world? No, right? Some of them are probably text heavy. They might not actually hit all the points I want. But I have to confess that compared to the average presentation that I used to make, in terms of like, well, as you'll see in this one, all the same backgrounds and so on and so forth, the ability to have this sort of like creative aspect automatically done for me is a big game changer in terms of communications, and so on and so forth, right? Even more impressive in terms of the machine learning AI applications that we can get through are how things like ChatGPT let us access things like this. And this is a real-time, on my phone example of being able to communicate to ChatGPT via
Hey, what is it
the
that I am
phone
actually
and video.
looking at here right now?
Sure, it looks like you're next to a small aircraft and you're focusing on its open door and interior. The plane's registration number is visible on the side. If there's something specific you want to know about it, or if you need help with any details, just let me know.
What kind of airplane is this?
This is a Rockwell Commander 112. It's a single-engine, four-seat aircraft known for its comfortable cabin and good handling characteristics.
Comfortable cabin. It does have a comfortable cabin.
Can it tell us what country this aircraft is registered in?
Sure, the registration code starts with CF, which indicates it's registered in Canada.
Now, the wild thing is that was done completely in real time, via a 5G network, right? And so it's these kind of magic tricks, I'm going to say, that really have gotten a lot of buzz as far as what the potential of generative AI can actually do. And as a little bit of a side note, if you're interested in seeing these kind of experiments that we do over at Digital Skillet, I'll encourage you to actually take a look at our Greasy Skillet sessions. So hook up with us on LinkedIn, and we're basically looking to put out a video a week, on the LinkedIn platform where we put, generative AI through some very difficult problem. They never turn out well, but it really lets us explore what the limits of these tools are. Now, these magic tricks are really, really neat, and they show the future. But what people want to know is what are the actual practical business applications? And if that lies generally in the middle of that water column. One of the examples I'm going to show right now is, for example, looking at requests for proposals. And a lot of people here on this webinar either review requests for proposals because you're a service provider, or you issue requests for proposals because you're a client. And these RFPs, they come in a various formats. They're long. When I was in consulting engineering, you'd have to go through these, figure out, should I go, no go for these? Do these actually fit the services that I'm planning to do? And you could get 4 or 5 of these RFPs coming across your desk every day. Now, what's handy is GenAI is very good at interpreting documents. So what I can actually do is I can actually open Mistral in this case, say, hey, you know what? I work for a surveying company. I bid on RFPs. And what are the things that I care about in an RFP? Things like who the client is, what the due date is, obviously, perhaps what the scope of services is, where this thing is at, some sort of summary of what the proposal is or what the RFP is all about. And then usually we're always concerned about how it's scored. What percentage is financial? Is it team composition? Is it company experience? What's going on? So I set that prompt up, drop my RFP, hit go, and Mistral will actually read through that RFP. And this could be, for example, a contract, an MSA, regulations, and it'll go through and pull out the information that I'm specifically looking for, right? What's interesting is that because generative AIs can interpret language, it might not specifically say how the RFP will be scored in that RFP. It figures it out based on intent. Similarly, dealing in a chat isn't something that I necessarily always want. So I'm going to say, hey, output this as an Excel file and put the information in columns. And what you're seeing here is Mistral has created its own code right now to take that information, put it as an Excel file, and then it's going to output it. And this becomes a game changer because while just simply talking back and forth and using GenAI as a super search is handy, what really becomes handy is once GenAIs can actually write their own code to do something not involving text, spin up a little sandbox, their own little mini computer in the cloud there to run that code on, and then output you results. That dramatically increases the flexibility of how this actually can work. And so we find that being able to use this for interpretation becomes a significantly higher value usage of GenAI as opposed to just simply saying, hey, write me a memo to my boss and so on and so forth. Similarly, folks are interested in data analytics and being able to, big data is all the rage. In this example, what we've got is, let's assume that we have something like a manhole inspection report. So I've got a whole series of manholes. They could be fire hydrant, any kind of assets. They could be wellheads, whatever you want. And in this case, what I've got is manhole ID, location, some condition information about the lid, vault, and overall condition, some kind of notes, and so on and so forth. And let's assume that I've got a whole slew of these. So in this case, I've got, I think it's like 54 different manhole reports, and they're all in individualized Excel files. In the workshop, we actually work through putting together a macro that'll take all of those and assemble them in this dashboard. For our purposes here, what I want to show you is let's assume we've got this Excel sheet of all of that manhole data. So we've got all the IDs, we've got all of these condition assessments. We could pop open a generative AI and say, hey, you know what? I have this information, whatever kind of asset or data that I describe it. And we really have to make sure if we want good results that we prompt well and comprehensively. So we tell it, hey, this is exactly what's in that file. I don't want it having to guess what's in that file. I drop that CSV file in and I ask it to verify that it can actually read it. It analyzes that document and nicely tells me, hey, I've got 38 manhole inspection records that you've dropped in here. We've got 14 different columns, and this is what's in there. Now, I can now start doing some analysis without bringing it into an Excel sheet. Say, hey, what's the average condition of all of my manholes? Goes through, does some means, 3.17. I can see the Python code it wrote. I might want to see, are there differences between different inspectors? Maybe some inspectors rate manholes higher than others, so I'm looking for some trends. It'll go through, it'll generate code and start doing this sort of multi-dimensional analysis for me, right? Now, one of the dangerous things is this whole concept of critical thinking, right? The normal next spot is to then say, I'm not looking at the results. What do you see in the results, ChatGPT? And ChatGPT in this case points out that JR is providing higher scores. It gives some explanations as to why JR might be giving higher scores, points out that MM and RR are giving the same, debris and blockage ratings are higher, and so on and so forth. ChatGPT can create really handy visualizations and so on and so forth, which, if you ask me, this becomes a huge benefit when we start talking about things like being able to generate charts for reports, being able to figure out really quickly how to analyze trends in our data. Certainly, being an Excel jockey is the number one way to do that. But then this again democratizes that ability to do these analysis and speeds up the production of these graphics and so on and so forth. In fact, one of the big hassles is, for example, plotting this kind of information on maps. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, take your data. Now I want you to create a map that overlays it over top of street map data. And it'll happily go through and actually create an HTML file here that we can open up in any browser. I could email this to a client. I could copy and paste this into a Word document. And now we've got color-coded pins along with little notes. And I'm going to highlight in this browser, no GIS required, no CAD required, so on and so forth. Again, a major way to actually democratize the ability to show data and analyze it graphically, and really, really helpful when you're doing proposals, presentations in your reports and so on and so forth. And in fact, you don't have to just, for example, show it on street maps. I can actually say, I'd like to show this on aerial photography. Here, it's going to go through, create an aerial, like a web page that actually has aerial photography as the underlay, and away I go. One little thing to note in here, however, is while this looks cool, you should note that the color coding has shifted now. Red's still bad, green's still good, but it's not exactly the same color span as in the prior example. And this goes into a really, important learning that we take away from this, where what we have to watch out when we're dealing with generative AI is how do we actually QA, QC our stuff? In general, and that these things are iterative. In general, my personal viewpoint is that it's better to use AI as a strategic partner to create a process as opposed to constantly asking it for answers. And the reason for that comes down to four main reasons. The first is traceability, right? I just showed you an example. We had manholes. We asked, hey, what's the deviation of assessments by inspector? It said, I think it was MH gives the highest results, and I accepted that. I can take a look at the Python code it generated, but I don't know how it generated that Python. Or if I'm asking questions about documents like that RFP, did it give me the right due date? It would be really, really bad if that due date that it reported was 3 days later than was actually in the report. So I don't know how generative AI gets the answer. So I have to be very careful when I ask the question. And, this is a major issue for many folks who are like, well, I can't even use it then if I can't trust the answer. But I'd point out that in a lot of our businesses, we ask junior employees, other people, colleagues for answers. That's the whole point of being part of a team. And we trust that we trust the results those people give us, but we still have quality management processes to make sure that the answers that humans are giving are correct. Same thing needs to apply to generative AI. We need to figure out ways to actually do that QA, QC and make sure that what we're putting out there is correct because we're taking responsibility for it at the end of the day. Another oddity with generative AIs is because they're probabilistic, they don't always give you the same answer. And so you could ask a question, and we have one Greasy Skillet session where we say, what's the most important thing to do if you're a startup trying to grow to $1 billion company? And we ask ChatGPT that 100 times and Gemini the same question 100 times, and it's impossible to answer that question because there's not one thing, but the computer gives you, or GenAI gives you different answers every time you ask the question. Slightly different answers. They might be all kind of within the, sphere of truth, but we're usually conditioned to believe that when I give a computer a question, when I provide it input, the output will be exactly the same. That does not happen with GenAI. Another issue with using GenAI as a question answerer is in terms of availability. ChatGPT Pro right now is, for example, $20 a month. Indications are that that's a money-losing proposition for most of the providers of generative AI. So we'd expect costs to go up in the future. Costs go up in the future, the availability to everybody to use it for, rewrite this email to my client goes down because the value proposition starts eroding. You build a process once using GenAI as a partner, that process stays with you forever, and that's what actually drives value out of this workflow development. One of the real places that we see progress and and a lot of really happy people, frankly, in using generative AI is in the ever-present topic of using Excel. Spreadsheets permeate most of our lives, and macros are typically that sort of one really scary thing that everyone wished they learned at some point but never did. Uh, I don't know how many macro folks we have on the line here, but we're just going to go through a real quick example of the world's silliest macro, where I've got two cells and I want to swap. I want to swap A1 with B1, so boot goes to scoot, scoot goes to boot. If I'm going to do this manually, this involves a lot of copy pasting, copy pasting, copy pasting. And if I had 1,000 of these, I will end up making some mistake and probably getting really, really frustrated. Instead, I can actually create an automation or a macro by going to, in this case, Copilot, and saying, hey, Copilot, I've got this Excel sheet. I've got a value in cell A1. I've got a value in cell B2, and I want you to make me a VBA macro. And by the way, I'm not a programmer, so tell me everything that needs to get done. We saw earlier that GenAI can create its own code. Well, it can also create code for you. So here it's nicely produced the program that Excel is going to need to automate that swapper. And you don't have to be a developer here. You don't have to know what this actually means, but thanks to the comments, it's nicely written out the logic. It also provides user notes for exactly how to go and copy this code and make sure that you have the developer tab in Excel, how to activate that, how to do everything step by step so that you'll actually be able to develop your own macro here, right? And in this case, right, it's saying, okay, then you're going to open up this VBA editor, which again might not be something you've ever used. You copy the code, you follow these instructions, and we're going to see that we're now able to actually create this this automation. And this is game changing. This is what we hear if you've ever heard about, if you think about Wix and websites, the ability for anybody to make a website. Here, this gives you the ability for anybody to make a macro. If you have an annoying task to automate, you can now actually go to GenAI and away you go. Here we've got now a working macro where, in this case, perhaps not the most highly valuable application, we're able to actually sit down and swap these two values, and I never have to do Control V, Control C ever again. So in terms of being able to access those tools, generative AI becomes a real handy strategic partner. The other aspect that we look at is writing code is one thing, but in every organization, there are hundreds and hundreds of ancient Excel sheets that, somebody in 1991 wrote this amazing spreadsheet that does this particular workflow, and it's exceptionally brittle. So you really have to make sure that this file is here and this file is here and that the columns are particularly lined up. Otherwise, this thing's going to break and it's not going to work. And then that person retired, moved along, who knows what. So whoever created this macro or this Excel sheet isn't here anymore, and progressively people forget how to actually use this thing. Nice thing is generative AI can actually interpret your sheets, your macros, and your code to bring new life to them and actually bring them back. So, for example, what we got here is, let's assume that we've got this random spreadsheet that someone's dropped on your desk. Now, the first thing, we're going to go back to our IT health and hygiene. You get a spreadsheet, you open it up, and there's nothing in it except this mysterious button that says start here. What do you absolutely not do? You do not hit the start here button. That is a very bad idea. But what we can actually do is we can, before we press anything here, figure out what this thing does. And I'm going to actually just throw this into the chat here quick. Who can guess what this sheet does? Anybody? I'm just curious to see if this has gotten out in the wild yet. And if not, then that's awesome, because this is going to be quite the surprise. So what we're going to do here, as I say, not hit the button. We're going to go up to this developer tab. We're going to open up Visual Basic, which we've learned thanks to our little macro example beforehand. And again, I'm seeing this thing's called Grid. It's got a whole pile of gobbledygook that I really don't understand whatsoever. No problem. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to open up my AI of choice, in this case, DeepSeek, and I'm going to say, hey, you know what? I've received this Excel sheet with this macro in it. Can you please tell me what it does and if there's any security concerns, right? I throw it in. It goes through, it churns, and what it does is it figures out, as it's starting to read through that thing, that in fact, this is Minesweeper built into Excel. It'll run through and explain all the key features of that macro and how this actually works. You're going to double click on a cell, a right click to make the flag, and very handily, and what should let IT groups rest a little bit more easy, is that it runs through and compares that macro against typical security concerns, right? Gives you some warnings like, hey, always be leery of macros that have come outside of your organization, but highlights that ultimately this doesn't have anything particularly nefarious, and that means we can hopefully hit start here and start being unproductive with our productivity software. And as I say, like, this is obviously a trivial example, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Excel sheets lying out there not being used because people have given up on them because they don't remember exactly how the data that's supposed to go into them works. And so we really do see this as being a major value generator in any organization. One kind of the ultimate example of how you can create workflows as opposed to simply asking for answers is looking back at this manhole condition map. So again, I can't highlight enough that using the ability of generative AI to create these small plots quickly for sort of informal applications is really, really handy. You've got and again, we should remind everybody that you do need to read the terms and conditions as far as, is this a corporate account that you've got that stipulates that the data won't leak out there or being used to train? Okay. Are you going to drop sensitive data into a free version of ChatGPT? I certainly hope not. Right. So we do have to be mindful again as to where this data is going. But the one point that I would highlight when we're talking about data security and such is that, especially for corporate accounts, the likelihood that the data is used to train the brain, the model, is the lower risk. The bigger risk is actually that the process of transmitting the data to the application is the bigger one. And the example I use is you could have a fully locked down corporate version of Copilot running on your machine, and in the next tab browser over, have your own personal free version. The big risk is actually dragging and dropping that sensitive data into the wrong version, right? So again, getting this sort of background health and hygiene is the biggest aspect to de-risking things. But sure, I use this often to create these plots. What would be even handier though is because this constantly changes, could I make a macro or code so I can create my own maps without relying on ChatGPT? And so what I'm going to ask for it is I'm going to give it the same CSV file and say, hey, you know what? I want to create a KML file now. I want to create a Google Earth file, but I want to do it from inside of the spreadsheet. I want to create a macro that's going to be able to do that. ChatGPT happily thinks about the problem and then says, yep, this is my assumptions about how your data is set up. And here is the code that you're going to use and you're going to put in as another macro, right? Now, again, I don't necessarily know what the code is or does, but it does provide me with a breakdown of how it works and how I'm actually supposed to implement this. So if I run through the implementation notes, what I should be able to do is go up, hit copy on that on the code that was provided, and then actually go back to my Excel sheet and now create a little application that, regardless of, I could put any data month after month after month of condition inspections here and create my own KML files, my own mapping of these asset conditions without actually needing to rely on a generative AI. I could literally not care if ChatGPT becomes $2,000 a month because I now own this macro, right? And from a traceability perspective, anytime if a client asks later, like, hey, how did you even make this map? I have the actual code in this macro that I can walk through and say, hey, this is actually how this thing worked. So what you've seen here is I've drag and dropped that code in here. I'm going to hit play, and sure enough, I've got an error. Nicely, VBA shows me where my error is here. And this is often where people start to get frustrated, where they're like, all right, well, this doesn't work, and this is why I can't do this. But the nice thing is that generative AIs can also help you debug your problem. And often it happens, this is the spoiler alert, because you haven't read the notes. So I'm saying, hey, you know what? I've got an error at this particular line. And I just copy and paste or screen grab even and dump it in. And ChatGPT nicely comes in and says, hey, you know what? The problem is likely you've got a directory path wrong, and it provides me with a couple different options. Again, if I go back and take a look, it'll turn out that actually my directories were set up incorrectly up here in this line. I actually don't have a my folder manholes. Instead, the path is, in this case, to my D drive and living just straight on the thing. Great. Going to save that change. Thanks, ChatGPT, for pointing the way. And let's run it again. And sure enough, I have yet another error, right? I go take a look. It's nicely highlighted where the error is. This is a VBA thing. At this point, either I can start taking a look myself at what the problems are, but usually I'll copy the error, again, either copying it or screen grabbing it, put it back into ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, and ask for help. One pro tip, I tend to always be polite. You may have heard recently Sam Altman saying that all these thanks and good jobs are costing a fortune, but that's not my issue here. So I've said, hey, I've got this problem at this line. And what ChatGPT has pointed out is that, hey, the reason that you've got this problem is you're taking a look for, in this case, a longitude in column C. Oh, well, that reminds me that actually what's happened in the VBA code here doesn't actually match up what my data looks like. In this case, the longitude, how far east this thing is in column B. And so what that tells me is that I should be going here and manually changing, noting that latitudes in A, longitudes in B, etc., etc. And even if I'm not a programmer, this amount of logic makes enough sense that I should be able to hand change that. Or if I didn't feel comfortable with that, explain to ChatGPT what the scenario is and have it suggest updated code. So sure, this does take a while. This is taking us 6 minutes to write this macro. It's not instantaneous, but as I say, with a little bit of iteration, with a little bit of looking at how this works, we're now actually able to have our own process that we can use on 100 of our own data sets, and actually create our own product, verify our own product, and automate this workflow. I can even then go in and modify this a bit. In this case, those pins were all one color, and I'd like them color coded. So I tell it, I say, hey, you know what? I took your code, I updated the path to D. By the way, I changed the columns around. So you got to work with this as if it's a partner. And this is, I can't emphasize enough, we need to work with generative AI as if they're an assistant, a junior assistant that knows a lot of things. So explain what you've done. Great. It now comes along and it actually modifies all that code. And now I'm going to actually be able to create color-coded pins for all these manhole locations, right? And again, I'm using manholes in this case, but survey control points, the location of power poles, sales data by store, the location of trucks and employees, and so on and so forth. There's thousands of applications where we have data in a spreadsheet, we have some sort of position information, and we want to be able to plot it quickly onto an aerial photo or a street map or something like that. So here I'm going to copy. I'm just simply going to repaste the whole thing. Hopefully it's updated everything according to the suggestions I've made. I hit save, I hit play. Sure enough, it's not going to work. I take a look, and this time I realize, yeah, you know what the problem is? It still's got this little error where it didn't have the correct file path. But now, thanks to working with this, I'm getting faster and faster and faster at being able to build my own workflow. And when we take a look at the results, what's going to happen, I'm going to get rid of the file that was just made, throw in the new color-coded data, and away we go. You know, pretty good looking map. I can modify this the way that I want. I could go back. I own that macro code now, so I could use it for a different situation, add more data, use less data, you know, provide the code on a shared drive, so everybody in the organization can now make these maps if this is something that's commonly done. I've actually created value now by using generative AI as a strategic assistant, as opposed to just simply saying, hey, give me an answer. And that's the end of it, right? And as I say, I think that becomes really, really important as far as how we actually go about working with these things. When we take a look at like best practices for being successful in terms of getting what you want, generally we really do need to look at prompting more than we typically would think. So, you know, in my example here of the manholes, if I'd simply taken the whole CSV file and said, hey, generative AI, here's a CSV file of manhole locations, and figured out I'd like to have a KML file produced, that would be such a vague prompt that, first of all, it'd probably get my columns wrong. It would probably not know how do I want these color-coded red good, green bad. I'm giving way too much scope to the AI to make these decisions. So you do need to actually prompt more than you think. You got to think of this as a junior assistant. The second pro tip that we suggest as far as success in terms of using generative AI strategically is using the 80-20 rule. So what I mean by that is we're going to expect iteration. As you've seen in that macro example, I did not get the right answer off the first hop. That's totally normal. You got to try it, you get something you don't like, you ask it again. However, at some point, you get to a law of diminishing returns, or you might force the AI into an odd corner from which it can't escape this sort of like path of bad logic. So that's why, as you've seen me do here, at some point you say, you know what? This is close enough. Thanks. I really appreciate that I got all of this code, all of this process done in 5 minutes. I'm now going to take it over the finish line and do these small corrections and tidy it up. And again, I think that that's really fascinating because that's literally how professionals work in teams, right? We have junior employees that we mentor, right? They don't do the job 100%, and that's great because if they've done it 80%, that's freed up the professional's time to do other tasks and so on and so forth. And that's kind of the philosophy that we do when we actually use generative AI in this context. One of the things that I do want to close up on before we open for questions here is that I do believe that generative AI at the end of the day provides a real strategic value in terms of developing workflows and automation. I've seen tons of effort in terms of no code, low code platforms that are really inaccessible. I do like this example of Wix letting everyone write websites and GenAI basically allowing everybody to be able to develop macros, automations, and so on and so forth. And you can even go as far as developing your own Python code and things like that. It really depends on how much effort you want to put into it. The big thing that we're going to be examining over the next while is what we're lacking is best practice in terms of how do you QA, QC those results. Unless you're building your own process, in which case I can go step by step and analyze the logic. But if I'm dropping an HR policy document into ChatGPT and saying, hey, how many weeks of vacation am I entitled to out of this document? And it spits something out. Do I have to go with sort of a trident approach where 4 out of 5 dentists agree, so that's the correct answer? We'll be seeing a lot more experimentation in terms of how can we actually bring quality management to using GenAI for these professional purposes, and that's something we'll be working out over the summer. I also do think, though, that what this has illuminated is a real need for grassroots training in terms of all types of digital tools. GenAI is, as I say, a great way to start fishing in that pool of machine learning. But at the end of the day, it's illuminating why we all need training on how do we walk around a spreadsheet? How do we chart? How do we make presentations in the first place so we know what capabilities we can actually leverage generative AI to use? If you didn't know that you could link Copilot to PowerPoint or how slide masters work in PowerPoint, well, then you're out of luck. Nice thing is you can ask generative AI about a lot of software tools and it'll answer it for you. So this becomes, again, a super handy place where this is a trusted partner as we work along. What I will encourage everybody is, as I say, this is a whole series of webinars here. For all of you that are currently registered on this one, our next webinar is actually going to be probably in about a month or so. And as a little Oprah surprise to everybody, you'll be getting emails with complimentary registrations to that next one. And I hope that you share it with your friends about what we're doing here. Really, at the end of the day, what we do want is to find these case studies and these applications and the directions that people do want to look into further. Today's introductory one was really much more about what are some of these broader use cases and how can we move away from memo writing and document summarization and rewriting. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.